The Federal and Velevin Hypermarket jointly present the Thuthukudi Marathon 2024 to raise awareness on drug abuse. The event is co-presented by Edison Cardio Care Center, Tiruchendur, powered by L. Anand Jewelry and St. Mother Teresa Engineering College, Thuthukudi.
Hello and welcome to the Federal. Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman responded to the discussion on the union budget in the Lok Sabha today. Now, over the course of the last week, while the union budget was being presented, there were a number of issues that members from the opposition raised with regard to the budget. There were several criticisms. A lot of the criticism, of course, was hurled at how, in her budget speech on the 23rd of July, the finance minister largely kept all references with regard to allocations and special packages and projects limited to the states of Bihar and Andhra Pradesh, the two states where the NDA government has two key allies in power, Mr. Nitish Kumar in Bihar and Mr. Chandrababu Naidu in Andhra Pradesh. And a lot of the criticism that came from the opposition was that, and as the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, Mr. Rahul Gandhi, and Congress President and leader of opposition in the Rajya Sabha, Mr. Mallikarjun Kharge, both said, as well as several other members of the opposition, who called the budget a Kursi Bachao budget, alluding to the fact that since the government is on the crutches of Mr. Nitish Kumar and Mr. Chandrababu Naidu, all attempts are being made by the finance minister in the union budget to appease and these two leaders, keep them in good humor so that the stability of the government is not shaken. And so that was one of the key criticisms. The other was that because of this lopsided approach, there is an assault on cooperative federalism, and not adequate or inadequate allocations are being made to other states at the because of the large allocations being made to Bihar and Andhra Pradesh. Another one of the criticisms was that because this the budget, a big portion of it dealt with schemes to address the issue of crippling unemployment. Now, the opposition had been claiming that the schemes that have been launched do not add up in terms of the figures that were projected as intended beneficiaries of these employment schemes, and that even if those figures were true, the schemes per se and the targets that were projected were not adequate to deal with the situation of unemployment. Similarly, there were criticisms with regard to inflation. There were criticisms with regard to the caste census and no allocations being made for a census or caste census in the budget, etc. Several of these issues were raised by the opposition, and today the finance minister was supposed to respond to all the demands and the observations and criticisms to her budget. Did she? Well, it's difficult to explain in very clear terms on what exactly the Union Finance Minister achieved with regard to actually addressing the problems or the criticisms of the budget. And there will be a question on whether her intervention today and the long reply that she gave in Lok Sabha today was largely about scoring political points. Let's take a few issues one by one. Cooperative federalism, disproportionate allocation of resources to different states. The finance minister's response was, of course, she was right in pointing out that the opposition is off the mark when it says that names of other states have not been taken in the union budget. And she rightly pointed out, she quoted from budget speeches of finance ministers during the 10 years of the UPA government, and spoke of how each of the budgets had large omissions in the exact number of states that were mentioned. So, for instance, she said that in the 2013-2014 budget, only 26 odd states, as many as 26 odd states were not mentioned in the budget speech. Similarly, she talked about the 2009 interim budget, where she said 26 states were not mentioned. And in the full budget of 2009, that was an election year, so you had two budgets, the interim budget or the vote on account, and then subsequently a full budget since the UPA government came back to power. She said that the interim budget of 2009 mentioned only did not mention 26 states. The full budget or the union budget mentioned did not mention 20 states. Now, so she was right in pointing that out. But then she did not give the specifics. The question that the opposition had was, what are you giving to other states compared to what you've given to Bihar and Andhra Pradesh? She did give some broad strokes of some highways, of allocations, etc. But she did not dwell at length on what was given to each state, how the opposition was wrong, except for claiming and repeatedly asserting that the opposition was misleading the country, was distorting facts. And while the UPA followed a similar practice of not naming all the states in the budget speech, and that was acceptable to UPA leaders of the time, her doing it is unacceptable to them now. And she talked about double standards of the opposition. Now, this was almost a running theme in her response to every aspect of the budget. And she, in fact, ended her budget speech by talking at length about a conspiracy to destabilize the country, to mislead the country, to create anarchy, to discourage foreign investors from investing in India, and so on and so forth. So cooperative federalism, her reaction, her response was that this is largely untruth spoken by the opposition. The budget makes adequate allocations, but she does not give very specific details. Similarly, employment. Now, the question that most opposition leaders had was, how feasible are the employment linked incentives that were announced in the budget and the internship programs that were announced in the budget, as well as the intended or the projected goal of job creation from those schemes. What we got from the finance minister was a very rosy picture of India, of its economy, of every sector. She talked about how employment had been steadily going up, whether it is among youth, whether it's employment as a whole, whether it's employment among women. And she quoted figures from the current year, interestingly comparing them from the pandemic year, from 2020, 2021, or in the other instance, comparing them with the UPA figures of 10 years ago. Now, an obvious question to the finance minister would be whether she considers or does not consider the economic situation during the pandemic year to be an aberration. If that is the case, then how is she comparing and saying that the employment figures in India and the employment trajectory in India has improved and is steadily increasing compared to the pandemic year? Similarly, when she's comparing these figures with the figures of the UPA era, remember that was 10 years ago, over 10 years ago. Any country, the natural progression of the economy should be upwards. The natural progression of employment should be upwards, of allocations should be upwards, not downwards. Unless you're in a global financial crisis, which again does not last for 10 long years. It will maybe be for 1 year, 2 years at the most, at very, outside thing if you want to calculate maybe 3 years. But she's comparing them, these figures, with the UPA era figures. Similarly, her allocation figures were largely compared to the allocation figures of 2013, 2014, when the UPA government was in power. Same situation was her response with regard to inflation. Now, one would leave it to the wisdom of the viewers to look around them, look around you, and ascertain for yourself whether, when the finance minister says that the economy is on track, there is growing employment in the country, there is no problem of inflation, there is no problem of price rise, and there is no agricultural distress. Do you, as a viewer, find that to be the right answer? Now, of course, the finance minister says that the entire narrative about a crippling situation with unemployment or job crisis, steadily rising food price inflation, rising fuel prices, all of that she blames on the opposition and says that this is a narrative that is being spread by the opposition. It's a fake narrative. It's a narrative to destabilize the country. One leaves it to the wisdom of the viewers to make their own judgment, whether the finance minister is right in saying that, or whether their own experience is different from what the finance minister is saying. What the finance minister did spend a considerable time in talking about during her response to the discussion on the budget, of course, was political issues. She talked at length as a rebuttal to what leader of opposition, Rahul Gandhi, had said in the Lok Sabha the other day, where he talked about resources not being shared with scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, backward classes in proportion to their with regard to their proportion to the population of the country. And Rahul Gandhi had, of course, given the example of the halwa ceremony that precedes the presentation of the preparation of the budget. Now, taking a leaf out of her party and her prime minister's style book, the finance minister turned the entire narrative around the narrative that the LOP was trying to create. What Rahul was talking about, and he talked about how 20 people, 20 officers of the finance ministry draft the budget, and only one of them is from a religious minority, another one from a backward caste, but there are no tribals, no Dalits, and even with just one each from the minority and the backward classes, that's hardly a good representation in terms of when you compare it with the nearly 70-75% of the country's population that these classes together constitute. What was the finance minister's response? Rahul Gandhi said that the halwa ceremony, he gave an analogy. He said that the halwa ceremony is happening, the finance minister is distributing halwa, but the halwa isn't going to the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, and the OBCs as it should. The finance minister instead turned it into a political and an emotive rebuttal, where she talked about how the halwa ceremony dates back several decades, how over the decades, this has been a ceremony to mark the hard work that everyone involved in the preparation of the budget, right from people from the printing press, from the staff of the finance ministry, to those officers and the ministers who actually sit and draft the budget, the hard work that all of them collectively put in. And she called Rahul's, although she did not name the LOP, but she said that the reference to the halwa ceremony was highly disrespectful in the way the LOP spoke about it. And she went on that plank. What she did not talk about was whether her government agrees with the issue of the caste census. She threw that ball back to the Congress by talking about what happened during the time of Pandit Nehru, the first prime minister of the country, what happened during the time of Mrs. Indira Gandhi when she was prime minister, or Rajiv Gandhi, or the Manmohan Singh government. And she talked about how previous Congress governments, and she rightly pointed that out, how previous Congress governments had rejected for a long time the idea of OBC reservations. And she said that if the Congress had back in the 60s or in the 80s accepted the recommendations of earlier commissions on this subject, whether it was the Kalekar Commission or the Mandal Commission, which talked about OBC reservation, if the Congress had accepted those recommendations back then those people from the OBC community would have entered the services, and today they would have been in very high positions. And she blamed the Congress for not having for the services not having the administrative services not having adequate representation. But she did not talk about whether her government is actually doing anything to correct that flaw. Now, the Congress has been saying that, and leaders of the Congress, including Rahul Gandhi, have been on record saying that yes, if these things were denied in the past, it was a mistake, and we need to rectify it. Even if the opposition had not said that, if the finance minister and the government realizes that there is a mistake, should that mistake not be rectified is perhaps the question that the finance minister should have been answering. There were several references in the course of the discussion on the budget to issues of farmers, of the legal guarantee for an MSP that farmers have been demanding for some time now, particularly over the last 4 years. That again was a criticism that the finance minister rather cleverly escaped answering to. And she said how during the UPA government, when the MS Swaminathan committee had recommended a certain MSP formula, that had not been accepted by the UPA government. And so the Congress and the opposition members or members who were part of the UPA government have no right today to speak about farmers' issues. It's again back to the same question to the finance minister, that if what the UPA government had done was wrong, why should you be following the same mistake? And if you think that was a mistake, what is the alternative that you think, in your view or the view of your government, which will reduce the problems of the farmers, address their demands, address their grievances? The finance minister did not talk about the legal guarantee for an MSP at all in her response to the budget. She talked about various schemes that have been launched during the course of the Modi government with regard to, whether it was PM Kisan or the insurance scheme for farmers, etc. But the main question, and former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram had been posed the same question some days back by journalists, where he was told that, your government did not do this. So why is it that you're now asking for an MSP legal guarantee? And he said that, look, when we were in power, there was no demand for an MSP legal guarantee. The demand is only a few years old, and it's a demand that we agree with. And we want the government to commit to it. But then the finance minister did not. Now, of course, the finance minister has another round of response to the discussion on the budget to give in the Rajya Sabha, which is expected tomorrow. Whether her response in the Rajya Sabha would be any different from her response in the Lok Sabha, one will have to wait and see. But what was clear from her response today was that, like many of the more recent moves or positioning and posturing of the Modi government after it returned to power for a third term, but with a fairly reduced majority. Similarly, while the government and the Prime Minister have sought to project an image, a kind of a narrative, a message that nothing that their government has done over the last 10 years is wrong. And everything is hunky-dory. The economy is doing very well. The employment situation is very good. The price rise, inflation, etc., fuel prices are all under control. That is exactly the message that the finance minister sought to convey again today. She even went to the extent where, since a lot of opposition members had raised the issue of starvation, hunger, poverty, all linked to the economic situation and jobless growth, or a growth that does not guarantee good standards of living. She went to the extent of saying that she rejects all criticism with regard to India's rankings in the Global Hunger Index, which has steadily been going from bad to worse. And she said that she refuses to believe that, as the global hunger index projects, that India's situation is now getting worse than sub-Saharan African countries, or even our neighboring countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh. And she said as much. She said she basically quoted that. I'm quoting her, that I do not believe these figures, that India, despite distributing free rations to 80 crore people, is facing a crisis of hunger. It is, of course, for the finance minister to reflect on whether, if the government of the day is, after 10 years of being in power, still distributing free rations to 80 crore Indians, what has the government really achieved in terms of bringing those 80 crore Indians out of their economic situation, and made them capable enough to afford those rations for themselves instead of the government providing those to them. The finance minister, of course, evaded most of these questions today. Whether we'll have to wait till tomorrow and see if she's going to be any different in the Rajya Sabha while responding. But it is, of course, for the viewers to decide whether they agree with what the finance minister has very combatively asserted in the Lok Sabha today with regard to the economic situation of the country.
The Federal and Velevin Hypermarket jointly present the Thoothukudi Marathon 2024 to raise awareness on drug abuse. The event is co-presented by Edison Cardio Care Center, Tiruchendur, powered by L. Anand Jewelry and St. Mother Teresa Engineering College, Thoothukudi.